Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll just take a sec. So you can see my screen, can you?
Yeah, perfect.
That just takes a second to load up then, and there we go. Right.
All right.
So I can get started then. So this goes somewhere like 60 to 75 minutes longer, like depending on the question. That's what can make this long, because some questions are super pedantic and in turn require a pretty detailed answer.
Yeah.
I've put in some slides into this as well, just trying to cover everything I can think of in relation to triathlon and Ironman and things like that. So there's a bit in it. Do you want to introduce me, or will I just put on?
No, I just introduce yourself. I think people have heard us waffling on there between us, so they know. People know I know you now at this stage if they've been listening.
Yeah. No hassle.
Probably
Okay, so
they probably copped I retired before you were able to come up and beat me properly from race walking. So I think I leave it there.
Okay, no hassle. There's 18 logged in, so is that most people who are coming?
That's probably most. We also have I also shared it onto our Facebook Live. We have a members only group on Facebook, so it's only going to our Carlow Triathlon Club members on Facebook. But we have that because some of them are just not technically advanced enough to actually log in.
Fair enough.
And they're watching there on Facebook Live. So
okay, no hassle. I'll go on, so I'll get started. Okay, so lads, quick introductions. The first slide anyway. My name is Evan, first and foremost, and I am a sports nutritionist. Just a little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's degree in food science and health from University of Limerick. So that's a while ago now. Afterwards, I went on and studied dietetics in the University of Malta. So what's the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian? I'm qualified to look after people who have medical conditions, and I can do things like read blood panels and actually understand what they say. So there are a couple of key clinical things you pick up studying dietetics. At the moment, I'm finishing my master's degree in sports and exercise nutrition with the University of Ulster. I've been working with athletes for a long time, so I'd always intended on going on this route, just formalizing it there with the master's degree. And what I do at my own consultancy business, I work as a sports nutrition consultant for Athletics Ireland, Cycling Ireland, and Dublin City University Athletic Club, to name a few. And on a one-to-one basis, then I work with a couple of household name Olympians, some professional cyclists, and indeed some professional boxers. Not Katie Taylor, though, in case anyone was wondering. I don't just work with endurance athletes, though they are the bulk of the clientele I work with. You know, as I said, there's some boxers, there are some semi-professional rugby players, high jumpers, soccer players, even weightlifters, anything and everything in between. So it's nutrition is a really, really diverse topic. You know, it's not just eat your vegetables and your rice. There's much more to it than that. Although it can be simpler than most people might think. So what are we going to have a look at today? Everything that encompasses sports nutrition and all the basics. Macronutrient requirements, those are your big ones, your carbs, your proteins, your fats. You need all of them. Some important micronutrients and how to get enough. They're important as well. Just because they're small doesn't mean they do not matter. How to fuel your training. So I'm sure a lot of ears are going to perk up around there. As a triathlete, some of you guys train multiple times a day, numerous times a week. Presuming you're not a full-time triathlete or you're not a professional, you have to balance work and life alongside it too. So fueling is serving two purposes there. Helps you recover better, and it helps you be better at the rest of your life too. If you don't fuel properly, you're going to be tired, your recovery is going to be crap. It just doesn't serve you in any sense. Healthy lunchbox and like how to lay out your day. I hate the word lunchbox, it's very juvenile, but healthy whatever you do going to work. That's kind of what that section is going to look at, how to make your day fit in around exercise, kind of what it would look like. Some useful supplements, and I don't know if I have it in bullets here, but we're going to look at race day stuff, tactics for intra-training, how to manage tummy issues as well, and just your overall nutrition approach. That's kind of the psychological side of it. It's not, you don't have to be as preoccupied with food as you might think. It's not as clear cut as you might think, but we'll get to that in time and probably in the Q&A as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to look at, carbohydrates. If anyone doesn't know, when I say carbohydrates, talking about bananas, breads, pastas, rice, bagels, sports drinks, honey, oats, cereal. Carbohydrate is a very big umbrella term. So any type of sugar, any type of starch, and even fiber. It's the lifeblood of an athlete for a number of reasons. Even an Ironman triathlete, a lot of Ironman triathletes and the likes tend to go for a fat fuel approach, but actually not what the evidence says is the best thing. So why are carbs so important? Number one, they take care of glycogen sparing. So glycogen is like your body's storage form of carbohydrates. As your glycogen level drops, your sense of fatigue starts to get higher, your aerobic capacity drops as well. So when you run out of glycogen, that's what's commonly referred to as hitting the wall. Taking on exogenous carbs or carb fueling or loading before an event can spare that glycogen and keep you feeling relatively fresh as you get to the near end stages of your race, whatever the distance. Second point there, it increases muscle protein synthesis, something that a lot of endurance athletes think does not matter. So let me clarify, increasing muscle protein synthesis doesn't mean you're going to turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger. It just means you're not going to lose what muscle you have. So it is really important from a watts per kilogram or FTP point of view on the bike that you are as strong as physically possible. You want to keep all of the muscle you have, and fueling in and around training with your carbohydrates, it allows you to do that as best possible. It puts you in what's called an anabolic phase. You never want to use muscle as a fuel source. Superior recovery, just jumping off that point there as well. When you're talking about recovery, it can be a bit of a vague term. You know, what is recovery? From a practical point of view, when you're working with a nutritionist, it's getting your glycogen tank filled up as quick as possible. And I have some guidelines on that later on to make it really, really easy. Carbohydrates, again, super important in that domain. Finally, better aerobic capacity. We will go through this a little bit later on. This is just kind of a blurb slide. In general, so generally speaking, the harder you're working, the more you rely on carbohydrates. So let's say you get to race day, even for a half Ironman or an Ironman, you're working at over 65% of your VO2 max. The general rule of thumb is anything that's 65% or under, you'll rely predominantly on fat. Anything over that, you're going to need carbohydrates. So I think we'd all agree that 65% is a fairly low intensity. You'll be hoping to be a little bit over that on race day, particularly if you're somewhat trained. So just take it that carbs are really important. We will talk about it later on. I'm sure there will be questions. And I'm sure I'm going to find some questions in my emails when I have a look at them later on for the Q&A. So how much carbohydrates then, if they're so important? And don't worry about the numbers too much. So I'm going to be sending these slides on to Dave. He will hopefully disseminate them to you. And when you're looking at this slide, presuming you know what your weight is, this is just a game of numbers. So on any given day, I hope you can see my mouse cursor there, you need to have around 4 to 5 grams per kilogram per body weight per day. So for me, I'm 80 kilos. On any given day, regardless of my training load, because I'm an endurance athlete, or at least I was, I want to be around 320 to 400 grams of carbs a day. And I'm going to show you what that might look like in a minute. The general rule of thumb then is for every hour of exercise, you add in 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. Though the training guidelines I have later on will kind of take care of this. So from a practical point of view, you just need to figure out how to do this and learn what the training guidelines are, and you've more or less taken care of your carbohydrates. That's 90% of the work. Okay, so what does it look like? I went with portions that are 15, 30, and 60 grams of carbohydrates. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. You guys will have the slides. This is something you can look at yourself in your kitchen, or if you have MyFitnessPal, just keep a general eye on your carb intake. Generally speaking, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're going to want one of these things here, these 60-gram portions. As a snack, you're going to want one of these, and these little ones here, the 15 grammers, that's how you add in those extra grams if you need to bulk up your intake. And we're going to look at carb loading for races in a little while. You need a lot of carbohydrates to carb load. So this slide can be pretty valuable. there are things that offer up bigger portions of carbs, like a stack of pancakes is about 150 grams of carbohydrates. That's not something you're going to do on a daily basis though, so I didn't put it in. These are like the most common daily things that I eat anyway, and that my clients eat. So that's a screenshotter right there. There's a few of these in the presentation that you could do with just memorizing or at least getting familiar with. Okay, so that's carbohydrates in short format. We will get back to them later on for training purposes, but for now, let's look at protein. If you are female and you are an endurance athlete, you need to be in and around 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight per day. If you are male, the range starts at 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kg per day. So what's the difference? You'll notice that the female range is higher and tighter. The reason there is that the men's intake is lower, is that we don't have menstrual cycles. So at certain points of your menstrual cycle, your metabolic rate ramps up as your body builds a uterus. That requires a lot of protein, much more than you would think actually. So at certain phases of your menstrual cycle, you need a minimum of 1.6 grams per day just for basic maintenance purposes. So it's considered best practice to have females up and around there. Lads who don't have that problem, if you're recreationally training, you can be around that 1.2, maybe veering up towards 1.5. If you're gung-ho, if you're getting ready for an Ironman, you're up at that higher end. It is worth noting, if you are injured or in a calorie deficit, if you're purposely trying to lose weight, you need much more protein. So I'll explain this. Think about, you're looking at me. I don't know if you guys can see Dave as well. When you're looking at me, bar my glasses and my jumper, all you're seeing is protein. So this is protein, my eyes are protein, my skin is protein. We're made completely of protein. So if you have something like ligament damage, cartilage damage, muscle or tendon tear, to rebuild that up, it's not just a case of doing your rehab exercises. Your protein requirements almost double in some cases, and the same goes for a calorie deficit. You need higher protein to act as muscle insurance is the best way to think about it. So if you're injured, you're looking to build extra, you need more. You're in a calorie deficit, you need more protein to offset using muscle as a fuel source, as you're more likely to do so. The number is 2.4 grams per kg body weight per day. So that's quite high. For a lot of people, that's very, very difficult to meet without supplementing with something like whey protein, even 2 scoops a day, especially if you're up over about 80 kilos, 90 kilos. That's when it can get tricky to match those numbers. I went to school with an intercounty footballer, and by the time we were in 6th year, he was eating 5 chicken breasts a day. If he was working with me now, I might suggest he drop 2 of them for having more protein milk or a scoop of whey protein, because he was assuredly miserable doing that. So you don't have to keep this to like rice and beans and plain chicken breasts. This can be easier than you think. There's a slide coming up in a second that shows you the numbers, much like that carb slide. When we're looking at protein though, most important thing is your overall intake. So going back to that last slide, looking at the numbers, figuring out where you need to be. And to get the most out of it, you're looking at getting a protein hit about every 3 hours during the day. If you have any kind of normal eating pattern, you're doing that inadvertently speaking. But this is where it gets a little bit sciencey. And this is where protein quality matters and where the conversation as to animal or plant-based sources comes into play. What you want to get is a 3-gram dose of leucine. So that's a branched chain amino acid, or a 10-gram dose of essential amino acids every 3 hours. Don't have to worry too much about this. I'll show you how to do that. But that's what you're getting every 3 hours. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a chicken breast or a scoop of whey protein. For example, if you had a little pot of yogurt, or if you had some rice with mixed beans, you would get that perfectly fine. Just to reiterate, that's for maximizing your muscle protein synthesis. For you guys, the difference between getting your overall intake and fueling training properly and doing those things, plus eating every 3 hours on the dot, you're talking 1%. Does it have actual implications on race day? Probably not. this is more so for bodybuilders who need to maximize it, or if you're in a particularly intense training phase. For 90% of the time, you don't really have to worry too much about that. If you are a 1%er, absolutely go for that, pay attention to it. There's much more important places to start, like making sure you get enough first and foremost. So don't walk before you can run with nutrition. People often do that. They will have major flaws with their diet. They eat no carbs, they have very little protein intake, but they will take beetroot juice and think, I'm taking care of my basis here. Not really. So what do the numbers look like? I put a little bit of time into this slide, and this again is a screenshotter. So the ones that are highlighted in white there, those are the best sources in terms of calorie efficiency. So it's one thing that plant-based athletes find difficult about managing their protein. If they're trying to lose weight, for example, plant-based protein sources are very inefficient. If you compare, say, lentils here, you're getting 8.8 grams of protein per 100 grams or per 103 calories. Compared to a turkey burger, it's much higher. It's over twice as high. So that's one thing that plant-based athletes do find difficult. I'm aware I have tofu over here in the meat section, and that's because it's usually used as a meat alternative. You'll find it in minced format. So if there are any vegans or vegetarians, you can use tofu or soya mince. That's your gold standard if you're not eating meat. That's kind of where you want to be hitting. That's the only plant-based whole protein source. So when you're looking at protein, what you want is high biological value. And dairy has the best high biological value. It's very bioavailable. It's very calorie efficient, very high in protein, and you get a decent chunk of calcium and vitamin D with it. When you get to your meat, then if you're willing to have it relatively lean, not fried, skinless, it's pretty good. You're going to get a big protein hit there. There's very little inside it in terms of nutrients. So you hear that general heuristic of, if possible, get your 2 or 3 servings of dairy a day. That's much more important than you would think for a whole variety of reasons. Again, if you are plant-based, aside from going for soya alternatives in your meats there, maybe a soya protein, the dairy alternatives as well, you're looking at either fortified soya milk, or something like a fortified oat milk, like Oatly would be a pretty good one. It's fortified with iodine and B12, which a lot of plant-based athletes will miss. And your Alpro dairy or yogurt alternatives are a good idea there too. They're kind of the closest thing that's not the real thing, in a sense. But again, I'm not going to go through each and every bit here. That's not an exhaustive list. These are the most common things that people get in. So figure it out, see what your numbers are. It's just a bit of a puzzle, see how you might put it together. A little bit then on complementary protein sources. So if you want to go plant-based once a week, which, for example, that's what some organizations and researchers do suggest, just for general health. Like, if we forget about performance for a second, plant-based once a week is really good for lowering cancer risk in bowel and colorectal cancer, and it's good for your cholesterol levels too. So how might you go about it? So if you're having something like a baked potato with some beans in it, you're going to want to make sure that you sneak some grains onto the plate as well. So maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of quinoa or bulgur wheat alongside it. If you're having a rice-based dish, throwing some legumes in there like peas or lentils will complement that. And the whole point here is that you get your all 20 amino acids on the plate. So just to reiterate, if anyone here has ever taken something like BCAAs, which are 3 of your 20 amino acids, it's kind of like smoke without fire. So what they'll do is they will kick off all of the cell signaling for building muscle, but you need all 20 amino acids present to build muscle itself. So that's one thing to pay attention to. If you're not having soya or soya derivatives, you need to do this complementary protein. If you're basing a meal around plant-based sources, so you have everything you need there. I hope that makes sense. if anyone needs further explanation, that just stick your hand up, or during the talk, just do that as well, and I can go back. Or indeed, Dave, you can interrupt me as well if you have any questions during the talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, people wanted to stick their hand up. There is a place there to do it. There's also a chat button down the bottom if you want to put a question up. We can see that. Or if you can unmute yourself there as well, if you want to just interrupt and ask a question. So if people want, feel free, work away.
I don't mind. I can answer questions during the talk. There will be a Q&A section at the end, so if it's not super pertinent to what I'm talking about right here now, do wait until the end. Otherwise, feel free to interrupt me. So yeah, basically, guys, general heuristic for plant-based athletes watching: soya derivatives like your tofu, your edamame beans, those are gold for you guys. If you can't get them, you need to have those complementary protein sources, and you really need to pay attention to the amount of protein you're getting. So that's really, really important. Okie doke. So fat intake then. Fat has quite an unfortunate name, as there's a lot of negative connotations with that word. And a lot of athletes, in a misguided attempt to improve their health, will avoid fat. Not really a great idea. So you do need fat in your diet. It's vital for steroid and sex hormone production. So why is that relevant? Well, if you have a female athlete, menstrual health is at risk when you're exercising a lot, particularly if you're not meeting your calorie requirements. The sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, they go an awful long way, number one, regulating a menstrual cycle, which has major implications for bone health. That's female specific. Number two, testosterone levels for men and women. There are ranges for both genders. That's important for muscle production, recovery, strength training, and making sure you can adapt to that properly. And when we're looking at the steroid hormones, then we're talking about things like your aldosterone, your adrenaline, even cholesterol is made from fat. You need a certain amount of that too. So if you're not getting enough fat in your diet, you have major reproductive problems. You have major issues being capable of exercising. So when you exercise, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure rises. That's the fight or flight response. You can't do that if you don't have any adrenaline. So you do need a little bit of fat, not too much. It should make up around 30% of your energy requirement on any given day. Polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats, you're talking about 10% of your daily energy, so it's not going to make up the absolute bulk of it. Saturated fats to be kept to about 5% of your daily energy, if at all possible, so minimal amounts there. And trans fats should be avoided at all costs. The only real place you're going to find trans fats is in a chipper, or if you deep fry things yourself, which you shouldn't do. I hope you don't need me to tell you that. That's just general healthy eating guidelines. So this is great. What can you do with this information? How can you pragmatically apply that to your day? Here's how. These things are the commandments for healthy fats in your diet. If you can do this on a consistent basis, not only will you have taken care of all of your essential fatty acids, but you will also be taking care of your omega-3 requirements. So if you didn't know, athletes have double the omega-3 requirements compared to basically everybody else. And I'll go through why. When you exercise, what happens is you get an inflammatory response. So if Dave is pushing you hard, you might have some sore calves, some sore ab muscles if you're doing circuits, or quads if you're cycling. That process is called DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. It's the really only symptom you feel from recovery. So just to maybe wrap this point up, exercise causes inflammation. So you have this threshold of stimulus that you can recover from. Let's say you do a tough session, you get this amount of inflammation all the way up to the top of my screen here. You can only recover from this amount. So there's a little bit left over there that's just causing you endothelial and vascular damage. And why you need to pay attention to your omega-3s, your antioxidants, is that it can help you buffer that extra inflammation. It can help protect you against those oxidative species that you're making. So, we all have this notion with exercise that the more the merrier. not necessarily the case. When you exercise in excess of 3,500 calories a week, your risk for inflammatory mediated diseases like type 2 diabetes starts to rise again like that. So there's a risk. It's kind of like a V shape there, and the inflection point is 3,500 calories a week. So if you are training a lot for an Ironman, for example, you really do need to get those healthy fats in, really, really potent. I know there might be some vegetarians and vegans watching. Obviously, you guys are very unlikely to have something like oily fish, salmon, mackerel. If you're relying on things like chia and flax seeds to get your omega-3 requirements on any given day, you're at a loss. They contain alpha-linoleic acid, which is the least bioavailable form of your omega-3s. What you can do, however, is there are new omega-3 supplements that are lichen or algae based. It would be in your best interest to get your hands on those to get some eicosapentaenoic and docosahexaenoic acid, EPA or DHA if you're to ask your pharmacist. Those two words are incredibly difficult to say. I practiced a lot saying that before the talk, just so I wouldn't mumble through it. Anyhow, for everyone else, oily fish twice a week, really, really important. Otherwise, trying to hit and implement these general things into your diet is the best way to get your healthy fats in. So I'm not going to go on about it anymore. I think you guys get the gist. Don't avoid them. So this is probably a divisive enough topic among the endurance community. Fat fuel exercise or not, or both, or what's the deal? I kind of wish I did a poll beforehand to ask, what camp are you in? Are you pro carb or pro fat? A lot of people will, if they're doing Ironman or longer, for example, they will tend towards fat on the assumption that it will stop them bunking and aid in better performance. The research has suggested that doing some fasted training, it can help improve your fat oxidative capability, which can cause some glycogen sparing in extended duration events, which is good. If, however, let's say this is not your first triathlon or you've been doing endurance sports for quite a while, you probably are after hitting the biological ceiling for fat oxidation. So just to reiterate, fat fueled exercise will not benefit you if you are highly trained or have a high training age in endurance-based sports. There's no more benefits to get from it. Once you've topped out your fat oxidative capability, you don't get any increase in capillarization or mitochondrial biogenesis. You just get the following things: glycogen suppression, your immune system is suppressed and puts your muscle at risk. It makes exercise feel harder. And if you're in the luteal phase of your menstrual cycle, it can make you feel pretty crap and put your muscle at extra risk. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what phase of training am I at? What level of experience do I have? What are my goals? If your goal looks anything like high performance or performing optimally on race day, you shouldn't really be prioritizing fat fueling. You can do a little bit. So if you think there's still scope for improvement, it's like 2 or 3 hours a week max, and you're keeping those fat fuel sessions to maybe 60 minutes. So I should have a slide on that. Yeah, okay. So if you are going to do a fat fueled workout, and it's not something I generally encourage people to do, for anything over 60 minutes easy, here's how you might fuel for it. So I have fat fueled versus carb fueled here. Let's say you're training at about 11 a.m. So 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning before you go out for your easy recovery run or a quick cycle, a slow cycle, something like an omelette will be fine, or even a bowl of bran flakes. So I can probably sense some people saying bran flakes are carbohydrates. How can I have them and do a fat fueled workout? The reason is they're very high in fiber, so they have a very low glycemic index. And when we're looking at fat versus carbs, the difference is what's your blood sugar at, what's your insulin doing. So you can have a very high fiber, low glycemic index breakfast with carbs in it and still do a fat fueled workout. From a physiological point of view, you're not necessarily in a fed state. Your blood sugar or insulin aren't high, so you're oxidizing fat. I hope that makes sense. So general rule, if you're going to do a fat fueled session, either bran flakes or something similar, or just a carb-free meal prior. If you're doing a carb-fueled workout, then obviously, go nuts, porridge, stack of pancakes, some pasta. I work with a soccer player who eats pasta for breakfast, which is pretty strange, but each to their own, I guess. We're moving on then, about an hour pre-workout. If you're going to go fasted, maybe a cup of coffee and some peanut butter and rice cakes. That's what some people do, particularly if they're going to go for a cycle, which can be pretty extended. Otherwise, carb fuel, something like coffee and a banana. I keep talking about coffee, and I'm going to talk about it later on because it can be particularly useful for people who do triathlons or extended duration events. But I'm not going to dive into it now. For the hour or 90-minute period prior to any form of exercise, and we will go through hydration later, you want to hit in around 4 to 5 ml per kg of body weight. So for me, I'm looking at drinking the bulk of a standard bottle of water or a Lucozade Sport. And the reason you want to do that, it's how you achieve what's called euhydration, or that neutral hydrated status, where you're not dehydrated at all, but you haven't drank, say, one of these in the space of 1 hour, and it's not going to dilute your electrolytes. When you're talking about hydration, it's a balance between fluid and electrolyte levels. So that's how you do it, and I do go through that later on too. This slide was more or less just to reiterate the subtle differences between what you do before a fat-fueled workout versus a carb-fueled workout. So I hope that made sense. So next then on our agenda is micronutrient requirements. I've gone through the ones where there's concrete evidence bases for athletes. It's difficult for people to say anything specifically about athletes because there's such a diverse group, and it's very hard to find lots of athletes who are willing to be part of the study. So for example, something where they've studied hammer throwers and protein would be irrelevant most likely to an Ironman triathlete. Whereas looking at vitamin D requirements in a ballerina is irrelevant to, let's say, a soccer player. Very different from almost every sense. Here's what we can say though. Iron requirements for females is 14.8 milligrams a day and 11 milligrams for men. So this is for adults. It's important that you do hit your iron requirements as an athlete. Not doing so is going to lead to iron deficiency or anemia. And most people know what those things are because it's pretty common. It's actually the most common illness in the world, anemia, particularly in second and third world countries. In athletes, it's pretty common as well for a couple of reasons. You lose iron when you sweat. You lose iron literally from intestinal cell recycling. Everyone does that. When you're running or race walking, even, when your heel strikes the ground, it damages red blood cells in the soft part of your heel. It's called hemolysis. So you have a quicker recycling period for red blood cells. You lose iron there. If you're doing an extended training session, you get a release of something called hepcidin, which is a chemical that stops you absorbing iron in your intestines for 6 hours. So literally every time you train, you're not absorbing any iron you have the few hours post-workout. So if you have anemia or iron deficiency, timing your supplement away from exercise is a really smart idea to enhance absorption. And for females then, and this is the key difference between requirements, again, lads don't have menstrual cycles, so we don't have that problem every month. Females do. You lose approximately 3.8 milligrams during a period, so it's really important. It's one reason why blood tests are important, and on at least an annual basis if you're anyway active, because the way iron deficiency and anemia creeps up on you, your ferritin levels will drop slowly first. So that's kind of like savings in the bank when you're talking about iron. You don't have any symptoms of your ferritin level dropping. You only get symptoms when your hemoglobin level drops, and that's the point when your ferritin is all gone or your savings are all gone. Then you're reaching into your pockets. When your hemoglobin level drops, you're not going to be able to bring oxygen around your body. You're going to go training one day and you're going to be about 30 beats a minute higher at the same pace if you're even able to do a 5, 6, 7 minute kilometer on foot. It happens like that. The point I'm trying to make, it creeps up. You don't have symptoms until it's a real problem. So biannual or annual blood tests, really, really important, particularly for women, particularly for plant-based athletes, as plant-based iron is not very bioavailable. Okay. Recovery from iron deficiency as well takes 3 months. So if it does catch you, you're not going to perform well for quite some time. Next on the agenda then is calcium. So for women, you're talking about 1,000 mgs a day. For lads, it's 700 mgs. It's slightly higher for female athletes, just due to the effect that excessive exercise can have on estrogen levels. That does put their bones slightly more at risk. Just for reference, 700 milligrams of calcium can be met with 3 or 4 servings of dairy a day, and hitting in some fortified cereals or things like Nutrigrains or Belvita breakfast bakes, something I highly encourage. So that's how you do that. Some people, if you have REDS or amenorrhea, or if you have low bone mineral density, your requirements for both genders are 1,500 milligrams, and you will likely need a calcium supplement. If you're plant-based, you need to go for those fortified milks and as many fortified cereals and breakfast bars as you possibly can. Those are your big sources of calcium, as would tofu be. So that's calcium. Vitamin D then, 1,000 IUs a day, men and women. Vitamin D has been in the spotlight since COVID kicked in, as it has a pretty divisive role to play in preventing upper respiratory tract infections. Interestingly enough, the mechanism isn't very well understood, but what is accepted about vitamin D is that it can improve your overall innate immunity. So it makes it less likely you're going to get any of those respiratory type infections. All around your defenses work a little bit better. All Irish people should supplement with vitamin D between October and March. So just to note, this isn't just for athletes. Everybody, kids, dogs, adults, old people, supplementing with vitamin D. Athletes just need this much to match their daily requirements. Really, really important to do that. So that's vitamin D. You're not going to find much of it in food unless you literally eat salmon, tuna, or mackerel on a daily basis, or you drink about 500 to 600 mils of super milk or equivalent on a daily basis. You definitely need to supplement. If you don't, do. If you take nothing else from the talk, it's that you should probably take a vitamin D supplement and do a blood test once a year. That will be a good deduction from tonight. I do obviously hope you take more than that. Next up then, we have our omega-3s. So 1,000 milligrams a day is what an athlete needs. That looks like oily fish, so salmon, mackerel, or tuna, twice a week, and about a tablespoon is worth of chia or flax seeds on a daily basis. So mixing it up between the two of them, that'll give you more than enough. So really, really simple. Other things that I can't really give concrete recommendations on, but athletes, particularly Ironman triathletes and half Ironman guys, you definitely need more thiamine and magnesium, because you guys burn a lot of energy. And thiamine and magnesium, you have very small storage pools. They run out very quick. In hospital, if we have a patient who gets malnourished and they run out of magnesium or thiamine in their body, they get something called refeeding syndrome. It's actually lethal. This has been confirmed to happen in Tour de France athletes. After about 4 or 5 days on the go, they develop clinically low levels of both of these nutrients. So this is something I suggest to people to supplement with, specifically a week before an Ironman, just by the way. Riboflavin, niacin, those are two other B vitamins, which you probably need more of. You're going to find those in dairy products, meats, most things. It's very rare that you're going to find someone who doesn't get enough B vitamins in their diet. Magnesium can be a bit tricky. The good news, you find it in dark chocolate. So if you ever needed an excuse, there it is, if you like dark chocolate. Milk chocolate doesn't have the same amount. The magnesium is in the cocoa itself. So sorry for the lads who don't like dark chocolate. Okay, so we're going to get on to some sports specifics. I'm aware that I didn't really talk about exercise that much yet. I am going to.
Sorry, Evan, can I just go back on the iron there just for 1 second? Just what about anyone who, say, has too much iron, hemochromatosis, who would have to give regular blood, obviously to maintain their levels at a safe lower level? What would be the recovery? So say they go in to give blood today or tomorrow. What would be the actual recovery from that, or how should they hold off on? Like I would suggest that they actually take a couple of days recovery, away from hard intensive training. But what would be your take on it?
For hemochromatosis, so 1 in 250 people in Ireland actually have hemochromatosis. We have the highest rate in the world, actually. Now that you mention it, so I'll answer the question, but I'll go through hemochromatosis a little bit more. If you have, say, iron deficiency, that's the only time you should ever take an iron supplement. So people who randomly supplement with iron, that's contraindicated, specifically because of the high rate of hemochromatosis in Northern Europe and Ireland in particular. I actually know someone, we both know him, we were talking about him earlier on, who has hemochromatosis, took an iron supplement, and usually, do you know how you find out you have hemochromatosis? You take an iron supplement and it causes you real problems. So this guy's iron levels, his serum iron, were 3 or 4 times normal. It puts a lot of pressure on your liver and it's toxic. For management of hemochromatosis, basically you're not eating red meat, you're definitely not taking iron supplements, and you do things that decrease iron absorption. So with HCT, what happens is you don't recycle iron the way normal people do. So it literally just builds up and builds up over time. So doing things like drinking coffee with meals, drinking tea with meals, that drops absorption rates. Not having vitamin C around meat products, that would be a good way to drop the absorption rate. In terms of giving blood and recovery, probably no requirement. It's just like giving blood. Otherwise, you're not getting a pint taken out of you, I wouldn't think. Just carry on as normal. Maybe take the day, maybe take the following day. There'd be no need to rest for an extended period of time. Exercise can actually be helpful for those with HCT. As I said, I mentioned hepcidin. When you do intensive exercise, your spleen releases that. It stops you absorbing any iron. So in healthy people, we have a homeostatic feedback mechanism that when our iron status is met, we have high ferritin, hemoglobin is in range, our absorption drops by about 40 to 50% in our intestines. People with hemochromatosis, they don't have that crosstalk between their blood and their intestines, so it just keeps going up. So that's where hepcidin can help. You force a hepcidin burst. So I don't know if I answered your question. I wouldn't say you need an extended recovery period. Exercise helps. Do the opposite of what you've ever been told about healthy eating around iron. No vitamin C, all the coffee and tea you can possibly get your hands on, and ditch red meat if you can. That's your real big iron source in your diet. Otherwise, there's not much more to it. It's kind of more medically managed, and it's something you just have to keep an eye on, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that covers it, Evan. Thanks very much.
No hassle. Okie doke. So we are going to get on to sports specifics, and we're going to kick it off with hydration. So anyone doing a half Ironman or an Ironman, definitely listen up. Worrying about your carb intake is one thing. This will shut you down far before your glycogen runs out, way before, okay? Your baseline fluid requirements are 35 ml per kg per day. So for me, if I'm not exercising, if I drink this from morning to night, I already have drank one of these. If I have a cup of tea or coffee, which I have, that's more or less going to cover me. If you're exercising, then generally speaking, 500 to 600 mils an hour is what will do most people. In fact, the stomach can't take on more than 600 mils per hour when you're exercising unless you extensively train it to do so. So keeping it in and around here is probably a good idea. For people doing ultra running, it's recommended to keep it to 400 mil per hour to prevent low sodium levels. But that's something we can get onto in a minute. Sports drinks like your Lucozade Sport, the reason they're called sports drinks is, and not sitting on the couch drinks, is they have sodium and carbs in it, and that helps with fluid absorption, which is something that doesn't really matter if you're at rest. Whereas during exercise, even 70% relatively low intensity, you're losing about 80% of your intestinal function. So everything drops. Water absorption, ability to digest things, that all goes way down. So having something that helps your water absorption here, like a sports drink, a really good idea. So typically you're going to get isotonic drinks on the market, or your high fives, your Mortons, they're going to be isotonic formulations as well. What that basically means is they have the same concentration of sodium as would be in your blood, essentially. Okay. So how do we measure hydration? This is something a lot of people get wrong, or at least they think they're doing it right. It's probably not what you think. Most people go with urine color and thirst, which are the generally accepted pragmatic ways of doing it. However, it's probably worth noting that if you have dark urine, that means your kidneys are already working really hard to maintain the water level of your body, basically. So you're losing too much water, they're trying to draw it back in. At that stage, when your urine is getting dark, you're already quite dehydrated. If you're thirsty, that's an evolutionary response to the same thing happening. So increased osmolarity of your blood, you're sweating out water, the things that are in your blood, like red blood cells, electrolytes, they're getting more concentrated, and that stimulates thirst. So thirst is about 30 to 45 minutes behind, urine color up to 2 hours behind. So if you rely on them, it's like finding out there's an explosion when you see the smoke. You've kind of missed the boat. Why is that important? Well, 1% dehydration, as I said, that's going to stimulate thirst. That's also correlated with a 10% drop in aerobic performance. So you're thirsty, performance drop 10% minimum. And you only have to do the maths depending on what your Ironman finish time is to see the ramifications of that. 2 to 3% drop, that's where you get that vasopressin response and it causes your kidneys to reabsorb water. You're looking at major drops in stroke volume, or how much blood your heart pumps with every beat. You're looking at major redirection of blood flow towards your skin to help you keep cool. And 3% dehydration is linked with a 40% drop, up to a 40% drop in race finish times. So if anyone was watching Doha, the World Championships in Doha, it was a testament to hydration. Those who won and did well had good sports nutrition people behind them. Those who did really poorly suffered from dehydration, particularly in the marathon and the men's 50k walk. It was very, very evident there. On Ironman courses, you'll see people littered at every stage of the marathon, the latter end of the cycle phase, and they're probably falling afoul of this dehydration. Why does that happen? Every percent of dehydration. So just to explain what a percent of dehydration is, if I lose 800 mil of sweat, that's 1% dehydration for me. That's not necessarily difficult to do. Standard sweat rates, depending on conditions, we'll say ambient conditions for Ireland, you're looking at 600 mil to up to 1.2 liters per hour, depending on body size. So depending on how heavy you are, what your sweat rate is, you might get to that 2% point within an hour and a half really, really easily. So every percent, it's a quarter of a degree raising your core temperature. As that goes up, what happens is more blood is redirected to the surface of your skin. And whilst that's happening, think about it. Blood is where you get all the nutrients and the oxygen that fuel you when you work out. The more that's going towards your skin, the less you get in your muscles. You're hitting lactate at much earlier points. So that's the actual mechanism behind the performance drop, just so you know. So there we go. I have it mentioned here. So even mentally, you start to function worse. You make poorer decisions. So that's kind of relevant for soccer players, GAA lads, footballers. A lot of mistakes made in the last 15 minutes of a game. So this is really important. So for a very simple thing, 35 mil per kilo, 500 to 600 mils an hour seems arbitrary. It's easy to ignore. Just make sure you do it. The effect lingers for 3 days. So if you're dehydrated today, what day is it? Today is Friday. If you train on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, or Monday morning, it's not going to go as well as it possibly could. So that's really important. So if you're training multiple times a day, a few times a week, that effect can accumulate if you're not hydrating properly in general. So that's hydration. So if we're moving on then to fueling your training, pre-training, what we want to get is simple carbs, low fiber, low fat, maybe some caffeine, and as I mentioned, that fluid bolus for the 60 to 90 minute period pre-exercise. So why have I said these things? Generally speaking, as I said, your guts don't work that well when you exercise, okay? And if you keep your carbs to simpler formats, you keep the fiber and the fat intake low, you give yourself the lowest chance of having vomiting issues, stomach pains, diarrhea, anything like that, as both fat and fiber, they hang around for up to 6 to 8 hours in your tummy, in your stomach itself, not just some vague area in your guts. So just to, if anyone doesn't know, you eat food, goes down your esophagus, into your actual stomach, then it goes on about a 1 to 3 day path through your intestines before it ends up in the toilet. So if there's food in your stomach when you're exercising, that can feel pretty uncomfortable, and that it might not get digested properly. But we have some stuff coming up on that soon. Caffeine as well. Again, I'm going to go through caffeine later on. There's a supplement section. We are getting into the, I suppose, final third of the talk, just in case anyone was getting worried. But there's some good stuff yet to come. So what might this look like? So that's my typical recommendation: a white bagel with jam, and I go for a milky coffee just to get some extra protein in, about 90 minutes before a workout. That's really simple, you know. And to bring it back down to earth, I've talked lots of theories and science. Maybe how long am I talking? The last 50 odd minutes. It can be that simple. So for all the science, bagels, jam, coffee, that's all you need to do. It doesn't need to be power bars or exotic foods or weird concoctions. That's more than enough. Post-training then, to recover, we want to get you having about 0.5 gram per kg body weight of carbs in ASAP, and whatever your fluid loss is during exercise, you multiply by 1.5. So basically, whatever weight loss you accrue in a session, multiply by 1.5, and drink that in about the 3 hour period post-workout, and you'll achieve rehydrated status again. And caffeine too. So caffeine and those simple carbs, those go together very, very well to kind of supercharge your glycogen resynthesis. And there's a magic time on this, 20 minutes. After you exercise, you still have a high degree of insulin sensitivity and glucose transport. It's an effect of exercise. It fades away after a while as you get back into a rested state. If you jump on the piggyback of that, any carbohydrates you eat, like Cocoa Pops, for example, not typically a healthy food, but very useful here, and whey protein, if you've had a very long session, you rapidly absorb them. They go straight into your bloodstream. Your cells hoover them up, go straight into glycogen. Your tank is filled very, very quickly, potentiated by coffee. The difference between someone who does this within 20 minutes and someone who does not, the following day, 24 hours later, if you guys both have a session, the person who acted fast, their glycogen tank is 2/3 more topped up than the person who did not. Why is that relevant? I mentioned it at the start of the talk. The lower your glycogen tank is, the lower your exercise capacity, exercise tolerance, general perceived effort levels, and ability to recover is. So higher glycogen means better performer, better recovery. For a very simple thing, Cocoa Pops and whey protein is my typical recommendation, and a coffee if you're a big caffeine head. Within 20 minutes, recovery is sorted. So that's it. That's all you need to know. You can put other things in there, like some dried fruit, a banana, literally whatever you want, as long as it's carbohydrates and you do it quick. That's all you need to know about recovery. Protein timing doesn't necessarily matter here. I mentioned whey here as I assume a lot of your training sessions are going to be longer than 2 hours, and it's likely to have been more than 3 hours, 4 hours since you had a protein source. So it's not a bad idea to put something like whey in there, which is rapidly absorbed as well and can potentiate insulin release. Okay, so if you guys have questions on that, just pop in there. That's all on recovery and pre-training. So how to fuel during training. This is a bit of a numbersy slide. It's kind of one to, see what your session is, have a look at the algorithm, and then go somewhere around it. Anything less than 60 minutes, if it's easy, just water is fine. If you're going hard, 30 grams of carbs. So like this would be met with Lucozade Sport, for example. Anything less than an hour, that's all you need, or a gel. 60 to 90 minutes, you're looking at a Lucozade Sport or the likes of a High Five. So you're up around that 45 grams of carbs per hour range. And the reason the carb intake gets higher as we go longer and longer, the way to think about it is you have enough glycogen to last about 100 minutes. And every gram of carbs you take on as carb loading, as your breakfast, during training, it's essentially buying you time before you hit the wall. So not doing this means you're very likely to hit the wall at an arbitrary time point in an extended training session or race. Doing this, it buys you time. Just have a question there on consistently cramping calf muscles. Yeah, you need to hydrate a little bit better. My friend, cramping with your calves happens for two reasons. It's either mechanical and your calves simply aren't strong enough, or your shins are too tight, or there's something not going on there. Dave would be able to answer the mechanical side of it better. From a nutritional point of view, it's always sodium levels. So you're either drinking way too much water and you're not getting enough salt in your diet, or you're not taking electrolytes, your sodium level is dropping, or you're taking on way too much sodium, so very high concentrations, and you have a lot of salt in your diet and you don't drink enough. If you stick to the general guidelines I have in and around this, you should be fine. But typically it's to do with salt balance. A lot of people think it's magnesium. That's a myth. I can confirm recent meta-analyses have dispelled that. Magnesium and calf muscle cramping, those aren't really interrelated pathways. It has nothing to do with it. So it's always salt balance, and that's down to hydration. So sticking to these numbers, and you'll see here, calf cramping is more likely in extended duration events as it affects sodium balance, which in turn affects the ability of muscles to contract. So that's why that happens. So you need to be taking on electrolytes as sessions get longer. Typical sodium losses per hour of exercise, it's usually 500 milligrams is the average. If it's very hot, or if you have something like cystic fibrosis, you can lose about 1,000 milligrams an hour. The electrolyte tablets I like to use are Precision Hydration. They come in either 500 or 1,000 mg tablets. Most people get away with the 500 mg per hour in a very long session, or in an Ironman or half Ironman scenario. You just pop them into your water or your High Five or whatever, and away you go. Okay, so you see then, if I had an Ironman guy or gal, I would be trying to push them towards this every hour, 80 to 90 grams of carbohydrates. That's the most your body is capable of doing, and that's kind of what you need to be doing to be fresh as a daisy coming near the end with minimal problems. So the next slide kind of shows you how to do that. If it will, there we go. What does it look like? 30 grams of carbs, 500 ml. As I said, standard sports drink, very easy to do, super easy. 45 grams of carbs, you're looking at a serving of High Five energy, just bog standard, their extreme energy stuff. One scoop, 500 ml, sorted. 60 to 70 grams of carbs, you're looking at a High Five energy as a standard serving, and a gel every 60 minutes. That's kind of how to do that. Gels typically are 20 to 25 grams. You might get the odd bulky 30-gram one, though that's a bit of a load take on your tummy. When we get up to the 80, 90 grams, then you need specific products like Martin 320 or SIS Beta Fuel, and you will likely need a gel as well. So a lot of Ironman triathletes use Tailwind, which baffles me because it's a single source carbohydrate product. And if you're looking to not hit the wall, you need dual source carbs. And how the best way I can explain this, in your intestines, you have two different doorways for carbs. One of them is SGLT1, and you have another one that's called GLUT5. So in doorway A, your SGLT, you can take in maltodextrin or glucose polymers up to 60 grams an hour in through there. And doorway B, then you can take up to 30 grams of fructose per hour. So that's why that 2-to-1 ratio exists. You've probably seen it on things. Power Bar, for example, says dual carb, something or other on their products. That's where it comes from. It's from intestinal physiology. If you have something like IBS, you cannot absorb fructose too well, and you are limited to 60 grams of carbs an hour, or maltodextrin-based products. So anyone with IBS, things like Lucozade Sport will make you sick. You can use SIS gels or buy maltodextrin powder online and just use that yourself. Just kind of make your own drinks from scratch. Everybody else, I don't recommend Tailwind. I know it's a thing of choice for Ironman guys. Forget about it. Morton 320, SIS Beta Fuel, and I'll have you covered for everything else then a little bit later on. I think there was a question there actually. No, I answered it. Okay, cool. So I hope that makes sense. These are really, really good products. You can get them in powder format, not just sachets. This is what I will typically use with some elite guys, and we'll start at low levels and then build it up gradually to be in and around that 80-90 gram territory. But that's something that you need to take time to do. And I do have a slide coming up on tummy problems and managing it. It's kind of relevant for this, but just bear with me for a few minutes. Okie doke. Here we go. Managing your gut. So, as I said, avoiding fiber and fat close to a race or a training session, as they have very long gastric emptying rates. Really important. Coming up to a race, if you're carb loading, make sure that it's relatively low fiber or low residue. And basically speaking, if you're taking in 800 grams of carbs a day and you go for a low fiber options, due to the sheer volume of food you're eating, you're still probably going to get 40 or 50 grams of fiber that day. Whereas if you went for your whole grain options, it might be 80, 90 grams. You'll be constipated on race day if you do that. So that's a really important point for anyone carb loading. Go for your white options, your basmati rice, regular old spuds with no skin on it, white pasta, white breads, things like that. Pre-race or pre-exercise, avoiding sugar alcohols. So you'll find that in something like My Wadi or in Fulfill bars. They're called polyols. What they will do is they have very high osmotic load, and they can cause water to rush into your gut and give you diarrhea. Babies get it. It's called osmotic diarrhea if you make their bottle too concentrated. Something I learned a lot about this year, actually. I have an 11-month-old, so that's fresh on my mind. Otherwise, then, avoiding carbonated beverages pre-training or race. I hope that makes sense, and I don't really need to explain it, but you're literally introducing gas to a closed system. You're going to feel bloated, might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Next thing then, hydration. So for aforementioned reasons, as you get dehydrated, your core temperature climbs. The higher your core temperature gets, the more of that blood redirection to your skin you get. It worsens tummy problems. So being hydrated is actually the number one thing you can do to minimize tummy issues. So vomiting, diarrhea, stomach pain even, that's completely avoidable, totally avoidable. Then practicing. So if you're practicing these carb intakes, the researchers are specifically Asper Ukendrop, he's considered to be the king of sports science, suggests that it takes about 10 to 15 weeks or 20 to 25 training sessions dedicated to carb intake before you're fully comfortable with it and before your intestines can actually do those changes. So if we did intestinal biopsies of people before starting this, and in 3-4 months' time, your physiology in your intestines is different. You have more of those carb receptors, which is pretty interesting. Caution with caffeine. So if you're not used to caffeine, again, golden rule, I would have always been said to me growing up at training camps, you never do anything new on race day. Same is true for caffeine gels. They can make you quite sick if you're sensitive to them. They can make you anxious as well. And if nothing is working, a probiotic can help taking it away from training on a daily basis. And L-glutamine before key sessions or races too. That can help minimize and cause subsission in tummy issues. This is not something you go to first. Using this a lot can decrease your intestine's ability to make that endogenously, so you become reliant on it, which is not a good thing for you long term by any means. So you try everything else before you try L-glutamine. Okay, so that's before training, in and around training. Tummy issues. Next 2 slides, we're going to look at how to structure your day, and I'm going to zip through them as I'm aware I've been talking for an hour now, so I'll get to the next few slides quickly. We'll do the Q&A, and if you guys do have questions, then we'll get to them. So how to structure your day. I didn't know what to call it other than a lunchbox. If you're going to work, this is basically what you're putting in. 2 different fruits, 1 pot of yogurt or soya alternative if you require, mixed nuts and seeds. Those are kind of like nature's multivitamins. So the difference at adding a portion of nuts and a portion of seeds to your day can cover up a lot of things like your zincs, irons, seleniums, magnesiums, and vitamin E's, which tend to be low in a lot of Irish diets. So that's a really important thing. Just make sure it's a box you tick off, and getting something whole grain, something with protein, something with veg. If it's lunchtime, a wrap with chicken and whatever in it is totally fine for the most part. Again, you guys will probably see that this isn't very complicated. This isn't made of superfoods, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. I did get a question there on beetroot juice. It's actually on one of the upcoming slides, so I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So basically, if you're looking to structure your day, you're having your breakfast, whatever you need. So if it's a rest day, you can go relatively low carb. You can have something like avocado toast. If it's a training day, porridge or a couple of slices of whole grain toast with flora if you have high cholesterol. Then as you go to work, school, college, babysitting, whatever it is you do, for the 8-hour, 9-hour period where people tend to be productive in the day, you're kind of basing off that previous slide, assuming like most people you train in the evening, pre-training then, something like that lunch, you could have it in and around here. That's what you're having pre-training. So you're timing that about 2 to 3 hours pre-session. During training then, depending on the session you have at hand, you're going for your water, Lucozade Sport, High Five, Martin, gels, whatever it is you're doing. Post-training, your recovery, you're getting those carbs in ASAP. And if it's a long session, adding in some whey or even casein. Soya protein doesn't taste very nice, so I wouldn't ruin a bowl of Cocoa Pops with it personally. Some people might have an issue with it. And an old coffee here if it's not too late in the day. Typically 3 p.m. is the cutoff point for caffeine, by the way. It has a half-life of 6 hours. So bedtime, roll back 6 hours, and that's where you cut the caffeine out. Otherwise, it will and does affect your sleep. Dinner then, this can be anything. The general heuristic, if my face was a dinner plate, quarter of it is carbs, quarter of it is protein, the other half will be vegetables. So half of your dinner should be vegetables. And general rule of thumb for athletes, aim to eat the rainbow. So it's a little bit juvenile. And the reason I suggest that is when you do that, you get a full complement of antioxidants in from berries, greens, peppers are pretty good as well. And it's better to get different ones in. They have a synergistic effect, as opposed to, say, I have a client who drank a liter of orange juice a day and said they had their 5 a day. Technically speaking, yes, but they're also probably going to get type 2 diabetes if they keep doing it. And they're only getting vitamin C and ascorbic acid, which by itself, it's okay. It could be better. So aim to eat the rainbow. It'll serve you really, really well. That's how to structure a day. Olympic athletes do this if they're working. Like I know a few guys, they have a good work-life balance. Elite athletes structure a day like this if they're training in the evenings. This is all it is. There's no difference between beginners, between novices and elites. It's from a nutrition point of view, it's like 85-90% overlap. It's the same thing. So this is what the pros do. This is how they do it. There's no secrets. So supplements, we're going to get to them now. This slide is taken from IAAF, so the International Athletics Association Federation. They gave money for some researchers to basically cover every possible topic an athlete in the track and field discipline could ever possibly care about. The good news is it also applies to triathletes and any endurance athlete. These are the 5 supplements that came out to be performance enhancers. The first one, creatine monohydrate. Probably surprised to see that on the list. Very relevant for endurance athletes. And you're looking at an 8 to 10 gram dose a day. 6 grams, if you're a bit apprehensive, will work as well. It's called a maintenance dose. The timing doesn't matter. And why you might want to take it is it can increase your capacity to store glycogen. So it makes the space in your muscles a little bit bigger. So when you carb load, you can fit a little bit more carbohydrates in there. So you, instead of a 140 minutes before you hit the wall. You're talking 150 minutes to 2 hours. That's pretty important. If you're doing tough work as well, or hill sessions, or you're doing high gear stuff on the bike, after 4 weeks of a maintenance dose, creatine can get you better at doing high intensity stuff for longer. So you get more bang for your buck from strength training in particular. Cool thing it also does is it raises your body's level of natural killer T cells, which are kind of like the police of your body. So if you get a cold or flu virus, they shut it down ASAP. In about 10 years' time, creatine will be suggested to everybody as a general health thing at a dose of around 3 to 5 grams a day. The evidence is already building. You heard it here first. So that's something everybody doing sports should do. Unless you have a kidney condition, then don't do it. For everybody else, fire away. Okay, so that includes actually if you have poorly controlled diabetes, because that will affect your kidney health as well. If you're generally healthy, belt away, it's totally fine. Okay, caffeine then. You can get benefits of caffeine at 0.5 milligram per kg of body weight. So just for reference, as I'm 80 kilos, if I drink a cup of tea, that gives me 40 milligrams. I can get the benefits of superior mental clarity with that. It can make me more focused. For sports performance benefits, you're looking at 3 to 6 milligrams per kg of body weight. So for me, that's around 240 mgs. That is the equivalent of 3 espressos. At that point, my perception of fatigue will be severely blunted. If I was still race walking, I'd find it easier to mentally coordinate my technique. It makes you better at coordinating your central nervous system, and you're basically able to go harder for longer. However, that's quite a lot of caffeine. It would be fair to say, and it can cause GI upset. It can give you heart palpitations. And if you're 100 kilos or more, be really careful. An intake of 320 milligrams or 4 double espressos will trigger a positive doping test. So Mo Farah used to take 2 doubles before any major event, so Worlds, Europeans, Olympics. And if he had even another sniff of coffee, he's failing doping tests after the race. So that's really, really important to note. I don't think anyone's going to try and do that, as you'd likely go into cardiac arrest first. But that's the general gist in and around caffeine. A filter coffee, so those French presses, those are 140 milligrams a cup. That's the strongest you can get. That's the easiest way to do it. I was asked about both beta-alanine and beetroot juice. It was in the email list of questions I got, and someone asked about it there a minute ago. So I'll go to beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate first. For you guys, they are completely irrelevant. Those are lactic acid buffers, and they only show benefit for events less than 10 minutes. So unless you guys plan on doing the world's shortest triathlon, or taking up the 3,000 meter steeplechase or rowing, you don't really need to worry about these things. They're not going to help you in the slightest. And for the risks that come with them, gastric upset, altered breathing mechanics. So anything that changes the pH of your blood, it changes how your body reacts to carbon dioxide and oxygen balance. And not a good thing to do for an endurance athlete. You don't need these, so ignore completely. The final one then is beetroot juice. So people tend to get all hot and bothered about beetroot juice. And the thing about beetroot juice is, yes, there is evidence there to show that it works. And a dose of 6 to 8 millimoles is, those little beaded shots or a standard glass of beetroot juice. That can cause performance enhancement if your VO2 max is below 55. So that's recreationally trained athletes, or people who are fairly, you're at the high end of an age group. You're not quite an elite athlete. If you're on the higher end of national level, you're very, very good, Nick, and your VO2 max is over 55. I suppose the ceiling for improvement in that vasodilative and oxygen transport response in exercise is diminished. You're already after optimizing everything. What beetroot juice does essentially is it dilates your blood vessels for you. The more trained you are, the more innate that response becomes. So basically speaking, if you're an absolute beginner, beetroot juice can help make it easier for you to train more. So to get consistent, you phase it out as you get more towards well-trained or good fitness levels. Not something you would really want to take on race day, can make you sick. It doesn't taste particularly nice, and odds are it's probably not going to work anyway at that stage as you're relatively well-trained. So I have never actually recommended beetroot juice to anybody, just by the way, ever. Someone asked me there about a magnesium supplement. I think the next slide should have supplements, so it does. Magnesium, again, not something that you recommend on a daily basis. There are specific instances. So I mentioned one already. You're in the week ahead of a half Ironman or an Ironman. Magnesium supplement there, really, really good idea, as you're going to go through a lot of carbohydrate oxidation in your carb loading and on your race. That can really drop down your magnesium levels. Otherwise, don't worry about it. For any females watching who have PCOS, or you get really bad PMS type symptoms in and around your period, magnesium supplementation and vitamin B6 are the standard therapies for helping that. So that can really diminish things like tummy pains, cramping, bloating, general confusion and fatigue in and around there. So that's kind of a periodized supplement, pardon the pun. Otherwise, you're not really messing with magnesium. Magnesium deficiency is something I've seen once. It was in a 90-year-old Maltese lady who had severe malnutrition. I've never seen it in anyone else. So the general rule of thumb with supplementing is you only supplement specifically. Okay, so magnesium person, you probably don't need it most of the time, especially if you're not female. So I went through this a little bit already. You guys need twice as much DHA and EPA. For non-vegetarians or vegans, krill oil is the best way to do it. Otherwise, you're looking at an algae or lichen-based product. Calcium, vitamin D, and iron are required in higher amounts. You can supplement with vitamin D off the bat, though for calcium, you should have a very good reason to do so. For iron, you need a blood test and a physician's kind of nod to do it. Otherwise, you risk iron toxicity or aggravating hemochromatosis you did not know about, which you do not want to do. If you have a connective tissue injury, collagen and vitamin C supplements might help. Very shaky evidence base, not something I've ever recommended to someone, because I can't say for definite based on the evidence if it does indeed work or not. It's no harm. If you have tendon damage or ligament problems, give it a shot. It can only serve to help you or to be completely useless. It won't harm you. So that's up to you. Whey protein or the equivalents, they're fine. A lot of people have a bit of a weird stigma around those products. I don't really understand the reason why. It's just powdered milk or indeed soy. If you have high protein needs and you're busy, it just makes it practical. So from working with people, like, these theories are all great and it's cool to know about it, but you don't cook your dinner with theories. You need pragmatism. Whey protein, protein bars, protein milks, very, very handy ways to get your protein levels up. How I meet my requirements during the day, most people are shocked to know it's microwave rice, cereals, and egg noodles you get in those packs in Tesco. Dump them onto a pan. Really, really easy. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be that difficult. The idea of clean eating is something you can probably let go of. Okay, so race day. We're actually near the end here. So the last section is in and around racing. 2 to 3 days before your race, your carb load, 8 to 10 grams per kg of body weight. So that's a lot. For me, that's up to 800 grams of carbohydrates. Just for reference, that's 14 spuds. So, you might want to mix it up between your carb sources, or you're going to be pretty sick of spuds by the time your race is finished. Electrolyte tablet the night before and the morning of your race to buffer up your levels. No more than that. Any more than that, you're going to put them too high. So carb-rich, low-fiber meal. So Rice Krispies in a bagel is a great way to do it. Nothing whole meal. Keep it all really simple. About 3 hours before your race. Banana and a coffee, if you're used to having coffee, 90 minutes prior. And then you're sipping your isotonic drink, specifically not water, for the 90 minutes prior to your race, as I've mentioned already. We get to the race then, So I've broken this table into the different phases. So as you get to your swim, you're obviously not going to take anything on during the swim. You just get through it, finish the sports drink, and if you want to, get a caffeine gel 10 minutes before you start. So you're starting the race full to the neck with carbs, as hydrated as you could possibly be. The best possible scenario. We get onto our bike then. That's your kind of picnic vest. So you're looking to get about 500 mils an hour. You're using SIS or Martin as you're trying to optimize your carbs. As soon as you get on the bike, you're trying to get a protein bar in and maybe a brioche roll with some peanut butter and jam. So I specifically mentioned like ASAP on that bike to get the protein out of the way and the fat product, to give it a chance to get down through your intestines before you start your run. If you have that right before you run, there's a good chance you get sick. So as soon as you get on the bike, have the kind of more dense things out of the way. It can keep you taking over for the rest of the race. Otherwise, jellies and dried fruit are a great way to snack and keep yourself occupied. And if you want, a caffeine gel at the halfway point. So again, caffeine lasts for 6 hours. If you're doing as I suggest, you have a caffeine hit 90 minutes prior to your race, just at the start, at halfway through, that's more than enough to tie you over to the end. When you get to the marathon phase, then water at every possible opportunity. And if it's hot, throwing electrolyte or salt tablets into every second bottle. Gels every 30 to 40 minutes, which is something you'll be comfortable with and have practiced. Otherwise, things like jellies, cola bottles, any of those kind of like gelatin-based kid sweets, really, they're really good as they can prevent diarrhea and vomiting. So they're kind of like natural Gaviscon in a sense. The gelatin in them, it slows down things that move through your guts, so it can settle a dodgy tummy, and they're a great way to get sugar in. So the different aims for different parts of your race: swim phase, just get through it, hydrate and do everything perfect before it. Bike phase, fill your tank up after the swim, get some protein in earlier on, just make sure you're staying really topped up. Marathon, water whenever you can, keep getting the carbs in and get to the finish line. That's how you should or would aim to approach a triathlon, or indeed an Ironman in particular, is what I kind of aim this at, assuming that's kind of the main goal for people in a triathlon club. It's the longer events. That's how all my clients would do a triathlon or an Ironman. So that's it. That's everything. It only took me an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to get to the list of questions here, and I'm going to basically just rocket through them. If I can find them. Okay, here we go. Just while I'm going through the questions, again, I'll be sending this on to Dave. If anyone does want to book a session with me, you can do that here. I have an online athlete clinic. The recipe book you can get here as well. They're all macronutrient and calorie controlled. And currently I'm stacked for online coaching. I'm taking on clients again in April. So if you want to register your interest, just all you have to do is put your name in there, and you can reserve a spot. Otherwise, I'm going to get to some questions. Dave, do you want to ask the questions maybe, and I can answer them?
Yeah, well, there was a couple there as well. I think you've answered them. We had beetroot juice based alanine. There was one person I passed it off to the end. What are the best food sources of thiamine?
Thiamine, so you're looking at any cereal, Cocoa Pops, Rice Krispies, Cheerios, anything fortified really, Nutrigrains, Belvita breakfast bakes, Fulfill bars, pretty class, dairy and meat.
Okay, start that. Just trying to find my message I sent you earlier, just with the questions on it. Which is gone.
So I have it here in front of me anyway. If you can't find it
here. No, hang on, I have it here. Yeah, we've covered some of it already. But anyway, first one: is it a myth you should bulk up on carbs the night before doing a cycling event?
No, it depends how long it is. So the general idea is you fuel for the work required. If your event is less than 3 hours, you will get away with having just a carb-rich meal the night before, a decent breakfast, so a big bowl of porridge, stack of pancakes, and fueling like that. Compared to like a half Ironman, an Ironman, a 6 hour cycle, then yes. So the cut-off time for carb loading, it's somewhere around the 4-hour mark when you would want to start.
Yeah, and again, I think we have it covered there as well. What did you eat the night before a sprint triathlon or Olympic distance triathlon?
Kind of what you would do on any day. So for those distances, you just treat them like a training session, as they're not particularly long. You know, you're talking like it's an hour and a half, 2 hours at the absolute most. You don't really have to bulk up for that. If you have breakfast and you fuel during it, you'll have enough glycogen in the tank to get through it. So I would do nothing different for that kind of event.
Yeah. Okay. No, we have, in fairness, we have a great mix of members between Ironman right the way down to beginner. Try, you know, so it's kind of relevant to all. So, and again, we've covered as well what you need the morning of the above, whether that's a sprint or an Olympic. Again, we have that covered there. How often should you eat when out for a long cycle? Yeah, I think we've.
So long cycle, like depending how long it is again, you know, if you're over 3-4 hours, things like your dried fruits, protein bars are pretty good. Brioche rolls. I have a professional cyclist who won't eat gels for me, and he just eats brioche rolls with peanut butter and jam in them, and he'll drink like the sports drinks. That's fine. You know, there's no perfect way to do it. General rule of thumb: you want some carbs. If you're over 3 or 4 hours on the go, you want some protein as well. So nut butters are a good way. Protein bars, anything like that.
Like that as well, yeah. Caffeine has been well discussed. I'm very happy to hear that. We can stay drinking coffee. We're all pretty fond of our coffee break as we're going. So we are.
Yeah.
Let me see. We had a couple of others there. Staying hydrated and long runs. Would like to know the best way and some good brands to use, e.g., energy drinks, water, salt tabs, how much fluid and how often.
Yeah.
Again, just real quick. I know we covered it, but you might throw it back in there real quick.
Yeah. So best way to hydrate: 500 ml per hour. Unless you know your specific sweat rate, which you can work out, just do a training session, take on nothing during it, don't go to the toilet, weigh yourself right before, right after, whatever your weight loss is, figure out that in liters per hour. That's how much you need to try and replace every hour. Otherwise, for everyone else, 500 ml per hour, make sure there's about 500 milligrams of sodium. So if you're making your own sports drinks, for example, that's 1/4 of a teaspoon. Okay, for most people that will do, of actual salt sprinkled in. And if you just want to keep it nice and handy, just buy high five powder, and if it's hot, throw a sprinkle of salt in on top of it. That'll do most people in terms of hydration. Otherwise, if you're going longer, you're going to need more carbohydrates and potentially electrolyte tablets every hour if you're over the 2.5 hour mark on the bike for hydration purposes.
Okay, and just in terms of hydration, I'd be running turbo sessions and indoor cycling classes as well. So and I'd always be trying to promote people to drink obviously plenty of fluid during that, with possibly and recommend a salt tablet in that, like. So I'm going to assume you'll agree with that as well.
Yeah, the general way that it goes anyway, you'll sweat more inside, and the reason being it's drier inside. The air is less humid, so there's a bigger evaporation gradient. So when people do sweat tests on the turbo versus outside, you can lose like a liter not 2 liters, but a liter to 1.2 liters per hour on the bike inside versus maybe half that outside. So for people training inside, 600 to 700 ml of fluid if you can stomach it, drinking a mouthful every 8 to 10 minutes, definitely an electrolyte tablet, and that, a strong one at that. That would be my recommendation. So yeah, you're fairly on the ball with it, in fairness.
Okay. And after that we have in relation to post workouts, swim, bike, run, specific supplements you would recommend helping to prevent fatigue and increase recovery.
None, just Cocoa Pops and some whey protein if you want. So otherwise, things like fruit smoothies are fine. I have one ultra runner, he goes off like 7-hour runs, and he just gets a hot chocolate and a protein bar afterwards and some like fruit, and he gets that within 20 minutes. That's fine. The thing about recovery is yes, of course, you can go and buy like the high five 4-to-1 ratio thing. That's not really going to be superior compared to normal food. It just makes us feel better because we're buying a tub of sports stuff. So, you think this works. It's like lads who are beginners buying the vapor flies, but they don't really train that much. It's you're skipping 100 steps and going to like the top of the pyramid type thing. So basically, the answer is no specific supplement. If you don't eat fish and you don't really like chia seeds or flax seeds, get an omega-3 tablet and make sure you eat a lot of color in your diet. That'll help you recover. Otherwise, nothing really.
Okay. Well, I've opened up to everyone there to actually be able to ask a question or comment as well if they have anything else. All they have to do is just press the unmute button on their screen and they can ask away. But failing that, I think we've covered a lot of information there tonight. So
yeah, it's a bit of an information dump, all right. I'll send you the slides anyway, and people can, my Instagram handle is at the bottom of all the slides there, and that's my website. So I'm easy to find.
We'll share that on our own website and Instagram as well. And cool. I took some screen grabs there, some interesting ones as we were going. So I'll share those slides on with the members of the group here as well. So.
No hassle. Okay, I have a question coming in here, I think. Oh, just someone saying thanks. Okay, yeah, I'd say I probably answered the questions. I do try and cover everything in the slides anyway. So look, if anyone does have questions and you don't think of it, just give me a shout. I'm pretty responsive.
That's no problem. They can pass them on to me and I'll forward them to you, or they can contact you directly then on your own Instagram or Facebook there. So.
Yeah, A1.
Evan,
A1.
Thank you very much, Evan. It's been great and good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. Hopefully we'll do something again in another few weeks.
Yeah, for sure. What I did there last night, I was doing a cooking demo. So homemade sports drinks, things like that. It was the first time I'd done it. People found it really interesting. So that, if you guys are interested in something like that, I'll walk you through how to make all of your own stuff and put this into action. But failing that, I'm sure I'll be chatting to you guys again soon. And Dave, I'll probably see you anyway at some stage if Athletics Ireland opens up the floodgates again for events. I might even take my hand at judging just to stay involved.
Do something, yeah. That's the home of retired walkers, is judging.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. All right, go on. I'm going to let you guys go.
All right, Evan, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining, and talk to you all later on.
Cheers, lads. Go on. See ya. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Right, guys. Thanks very much. See you all. Bye-bye.